Her car was found abandoned in a grocery store parking lot back in 1990, keys still sitting in the ignition, her purse still resting untouched on the passenger seat, a half-finished pack of gum on the dashboard, exactly as if she'd simply stepped away for a moment and forgotten to come back. Police searched that car 5 separate times over the following 12 years, each time treating it as a formality rather than a fresh chance to find something they'd missed. They never once searched the trunk properly, not thoroughly, not the way it needed to be searched by anyone paying real attention. And when they finally did, purely by accident, at a routine impound lot auction in 2002, they found 17-year-old Renee Castillo exactly where she had been the entire time, for 12 long years, hidden less than a mile from her own front door, close enough that her mother had likely driven past that impound lot more than once without ever knowing. Renee left her house on a Friday night in October of 1990 to meet friends at the mall, the same way she did most weekends without fail, the kind of routine so predictable her mother didn't even think to worry until well past midnight. She never arrived. Her white 1985 Buick was discovered the next morning in a grocery store lot 2 miles from her home, completely untouched, engine cold, as if she'd simply stepped out and walked away on foot into thin air, leaving everything she owned behind in the car. Police treated it as a runaway case at first, a common and often careless assumption made about teenage girls all throughout the 90s, one that cost precious early days in countless investigations across the country. When her family insisted, over and over and over again, in every interview and every follow-up call, that she simply wasn't the type of girl to run away, that she had plans for the following week she'd never abandon, detectives eventually shifted their theory toward abduction, most likely by someone she already knew and trusted deeply enough to get close without a struggle. The car was processed, fingerprinted, photographed in exhaustive detail from every angle, then towed to an impound lot as evidence, where it sat for over a decade behind the county sheriff's department, tagged clearly as unresolved evidence, strictly not to be released under any circumstances whatsoever. Somewhere between paperwork errors, constant staff turnover, and a decade of shrinking department budgets that saw 3 different sheriffs come and go, that critical tag was quietly lost in the shuffle, a single line of paperwork that should have been irreplaceable. In 2002, the vehicle was mistakenly flagged for disposal and sent out to a public impound auction, sold for parts to whoever bid the highest that afternoon, a transaction that took less than 4 minutes. Right here, before we get into what that buyer actually discovered, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because the next part of Renee's story is exactly the reason we started making these videos in the first place, to make sure stories like this one never get lost in paperwork again. A buyer at that auction, a man who bought old vehicles for cheap and stripped them for resale parts, noticed something strange about the trunk almost immediately while doing his usual inspection. The spare tire well beneath the trunk floor had clearly been altered a slightly different finish than anything else in the car. Curious and completely unaware of the vehicle's dark history, he pried it open with a crowbar in his own garage that same evening, expecting scrap metal or maybe a forgotten toolkit. What he found ended one of the county's oldest and coldest cases and reopened a wound nobody expected to reopen after 12 years of total silence. Investigators determined Renee had never actually left that parking lot at all, not for a single second, not even a walk toward the store entrance. She'd been killed the very same night she disappeared, her body concealed inside a compartment built directly in her own car by someone with detailed, intimate knowledge of its structure, someone who'd had access to that vehicle long before she ever drove it that final, fatal night, someone who knew exactly where the factory welds were and how to hide new ones among them. That someone turned out to be her own older cousin, a mechanic who had helped fix up the Buick as a gift for her 16th birthday 2 years earlier, quietly installing the hidden compartment long before anyone had a single reason on earth to suspect him of anything at all, a modification he'd made under the guise of adding extra trunk storage, a detail Renee had mentioned proudly to friends at the time. For 12 full years, the evidence had been sitting untouched and mislabeled, nearly destroyed entirely by a simple clerical mistake, a chilling reminder of just how close the truth came to being lost forever, sold off for scrap metal without anyone ever knowing what was hidden inside. A truth that came down to one curious buyer, noticing bolts that didn't quite match. Renee's mother passed away in 1999, 3 years before her daughter was finally found. Never once knowing the truth had been parked less than a mile from her own home for the entire 12 years, she spent desperately searching, driving past that same impound lot on her way to work more mornings than anyone will ever be able to count.